You know what they say, if at first you don't succeed, try again. And the Winnipeg Jets will try to beat the Florida Panthers after falling the first time. Can they do it? Find out on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is going to be fun. We're going to be talking about the Jets against the Panthers round 2. And you know what? I think the Jets are going to win this one. I will say 5-4 because I just feel like this is going to be a very high event game. I think the Jets are going to have a big response after what was, quite frankly, a very underwhelming performance in Thursday's game. But we'll chat about Saturday's game. Thursday was also underwhelming, but against a different Florida team. We'll chat about why I think they're going to have a big response for the Panthers, though, in just a moment. Before we go any further, though, I did want to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by Indeed. Still searching for a great candidate for your company? Don't search, just match with Indeed. Stay tuned to hear more about how Indeed can help a business owner like you hire the best and brightest employees that the workforce has to offer and do so fast. Now, like I said, I think the Jets are going to win against the Panthers 5-4. And the reason that I'm looking at this and feeling this way is because traditionally, when the Jets have faced some sort of a challenge this year, they've usually responded, especially after a loss. Now, it's not guaranteed. Nothing is written in stone here, but I just feel like home ice advantage is going to be something the Jets will lean on. They still have the best record out there. They are still, ranked pretty highly in a ton of categories. A couple of bad games on the road doesn't really change that. And I even other teams that are supposed to be really good, like Dallas. I saw that they were losing to the Anaheim Ducks, and I think most people have the Ducks as a rebuilder. So, any given Sunday, you can lose a game that you're probably supposed to be winning. So I think in this respect, it wasn't like the Jets were predicted to beat the Panthers. The Lightning, perhaps, but the Panthers are legitimately like an amazing team. And certainly one of the few that I think truly rivals the Jets for a shot at being a contender this year. Winnipeg is, swimming with the big boys right now. And I think that, the last game kind of showed them where they want to be, not necessarily where they are. But the nice thing about where the Jets are right now is that the room for growth is immense, and they already have the league's best record. So what happens if they get even better, right? They might start to go on an absolutely unholy tear, which I think for the rest of the NHL is probably not a comforting thought. Despite dropping a couple of games, the Jets are still clear in first place with 30 points, and the next closest team is Washington with 27. Yeah, Washington, if you can believe it. Now, neither team is slated to really make any changes. I want to focus for the Jets' purposes on Florida's top 6. This is where the problem was big time. Winnipeg really didn't have an answer for Erod, Barkov, and Reinhart, and then the trio over Hagee, Bennett, and Tkachuk. Those two lines were very, very difficult for Winnipeg to contain. Bennett had some clear looks. Barkov was eating Winnipeg alive. Erod and Reinhart were attacking the faceoff circles and slot. It was a mess. This was one of those games where you didn't even really notice Tkachuk all that much because so many other aspects of Florida's offense were really clicking. And then, Semiskevich made his presence known later. And so this game was just very frustrating. It felt like the Jets couldn't even take advantage of the depth matchups because, the Florida top 6 was winning so handily elsewhere. You can look at this game as perhaps another barometer test, right? You had a really bad outing in the last game against them. How do you respond on your own ice? And I think the Jets are primed for a bounce back. Now, The one thing that is going to be kind of worth tracking, I guess, among other things, but I really want to see what happens with the top line. The top line for me was a big disappointment against Florida. And it's not like I'm not looking at all of these other lines thinking that they struggled too, because they absolutely did. But the top line in particular has to be the one that sets the pace. And if it's not, that is a big problem for Winnipeg. I think Scheifele himself would probably admit that, last game, the performance just wasn't there. But a second opportunity to right those wrongs and get back to what, makes this team great, I think is a great opportunity. This was a learning experience this past weekend, and I think Tuesday's game, later this evening, will be a great opportunity for the Jets to bounce back and show people why they still are one of the top teams in the league, which feels really funny to say about a team that's 15-3-0, but I honestly do think that that's kind of what the assessment is. I think a lot of people out there kind of share something of a similar perspective that I have, which is that, when it comes to the regular season, I care about it a lot, right? It's very important that the Jets do well. But the thing with Winnipeg is that they're always good during the regular season for the most part, and then the playoffs are when stuff like this starts to show up and the Jets don't have an answer for it. So I think a lot of people look at the Jets as a fraudulent team, and I feel like that's not really fair, but I also can't dismiss some of the very specific criticisms about certain talent gaps or issues in roster construction or lineup arrangements. That stuff is not necessarily false. So I think it's a tough balance for Winnipeg to kind of, win support for what I think that they're doing really well, while sort of acknowledging that there's still room for improvement. And I think that that's very true of this team, which, really doesn't have like a second line center that would be a second line center on most other contenders. And yet the Jets were 15-3-0 with that. And that's kind of a notable gap for this team. I think it's something that, for Winnipeg, even without talking about the top line, the fact that the Jets have made do with an arrangement of players that feels more like getting more out of the sum of the parts than some of the individual parts is really impressive. This team fights for the badge. They fight for each other. And, they understand that they're maybe not going to have a McKinnon or a McDavid or some of these other crazy franchise level talents, but Winnipeg still makes do with what it has, and they've accomplished a ton. The one area that they do absolutely have that level of player is in net, and that guy, Connor Hellebuck, might just be at times the best player in any position in the whole league. That is how good he's been this year. The league average this season right now was like a 901. He's at a 926, and that's including the past couple of games where he got touched up a bit. So, yeah, let's just be honest, right? Like, he is truly amazing, and he can be Winnipeg's great equalizer until the rest of the team is fully caught up. And I don't know that the Jets really have to do that much to get there. I think that there are some internal changes that they could maybe consider that might help out, the flow of the team. And then if they make a big trade deadline acquisition or something, the Jets might really start to take flight. They're already like 80% of the way, maybe 90% of the way there. There's just a couple of things that I think they need to work on, and this team will start to cook. But starting off with a big win against the Panthers, especially if you play them at least, break even, if not better, I think that starts to kick the team into gear and gets them going again. And I have confidence in this squad. They've shown that they've been resilient already. They've come from behind in so many games, and, past couple of outings, maybe not so great on the road, but home is where the heart is, and I expect the Jets to come out with a big response and hopefully a big win. But give me your score predictions in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Now, amidst all of this, the Jets are hopeful to get a player back here in the near future, and that is Ville Heinola, who has been sent down to the Moose for a conditioning stint. We'll chat about what this might mean for his future and how likely it is that we're going to see him sometime in the next couple of weeks. Before we dive into all of that, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners that I referred to earlier at Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed helps you ditch the busy work by helping you schedule, screen, and message so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites. I've used Indeed when I was looking for work some time ago. I can personally attest to their resume system being great, right? It's detailed, comprehensive, and when you actually start looking for jobs, right, it immediately pulls up things that are relevant to your work experience, your discipline, your skill sets, and your salary ask. So if you're an employer that's looking for top quality candidates, this is a phenomenally quick way to get a great pool almost immediately. And there are over 3.5 million businesses worldwide that already use Indeed. I highly recommend that you join them right now. Listeners of the show will even get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on Locked On Winnipeg Jets. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just, we're chatting about some interesting stuff with Winnipeg's recent form, some of the tough losses, and what I expect to be a big rebound, but they did get some really good news that Ville Heinola is just about ready to return. Now, I know Heinola sometimes elicits mixed responses from the fan base, and to be honest, I don't entirely blame folks. He's had in the past good games and some bad games. I think his last stretch in preseason, last season when he was supposed to become a regular, it looked like the most confident, most assured, and most controlled that I'd seen Heinola playing against relatively NHL caliber competition, and he should have been in the lineup at that point. But of course, the injury was a huge setback, and now Heinola is now dealing with a second injury, although this one was an infection related to that previous surgery, right? So it's been a while since he's actually played hockey. And now that he has had some time to heal, about a month and a half or so, it feels like Heinola's time is upon us. But I don't think he's actually going to play anytime in the next couple of weeks. Heinola will go down to the Moose for a conditioning stint. And then I wouldn't be shocked if the Jets kind of wait for early December to bring him back in. Not because they may not feel he's ready, but because Heinola kind of has a particular style of play that may not translate to what the Jets want from that third pairing role, right? Now, I love his ability to be a really effective puck mover. I think that he's very skilled in possession. He makes great breakout passes. He skates well, and he can help transition the team really effectively up the ice, which is something that, Logan Stanley tries to do, and sometimes he'll actually hit good breakout passes. I think that that's something that he doesn't always get enough credit for, partly because there are moments where he sails that pass into a skate. With Heinola, though, he's a little more consistent with that stuff. Stretch passing and long passing are kind of specialties of his, and it also sort of helps him avoid the contact, right? He is undersized. That is a legitimate thing with him. He's not small, and I think he's a little more physical than people give him credit for. You'll see him sometimes with a Moose throw some really nasty checks. He does not shy away from throwing hits, and sometimes they've been even borderline kind of not, I wouldn't say dirty, but they're a little edgy. And so Heinola is not afraid to mix it up. He's gotten into a scrap or two in his time, but I think the biggest thing with him is that he doesn't want to have the puck. He wants to get it up the ice as quickly as possible and start those counters, which is actually something that I think would benefit the Jets. One thing Winnipeg sometimes struggles with is when they get buried deep in their own zone, they can't get out. It really stifles their offensive creation because everyone spends so much time and energy on their shifts defending. Heinola has the skill set that can kind of help them break out of that. And I think if you have him with like a Miller or something of that nature, I think you can get some real mileage out of it. Heinola, Miller will be a little bit loose at times. I think defensively that will be an issue, but they're going to give you so much offensive creativity and support that I don't know that it's going to matter, especially if they're playing limited minutes, right? I don't know what Heinola's ceiling is at this point. He's missed a fair bit of time. I know that he was playing last spring with the Moose, but it's been a long time since he touched the ice in a game state. So I don't know what he's going to be like this year, but I am hopeful for him to do well enough to crack the lineup. I just wonder if the Jets are also thinking he doesn't really PK. And so, do they want to shoehorn him in? Maybe not. I think that is one concern that I have. And like they just seem to like Stanley. One, way or another, I think Stanley, when he's off of injured reserve, is going to get more games. I don't know how they're going to really handle all of this because, having Coughlin and Fleury, Heinola, and Stanley all on the roster at the same time is probably not how they want to run things. I imagine somebody gets waived. It's got to be like Coughlin or one of those other guys. I can't really see them waiving Stanley, not when they're paying him this much. And seemingly they just really like him, right? If you ask me, I don't think that Fleury has really done enough to be demoted. I think he's been good with Miller. I feel like Miller or Fleury has been relatively stable. Is he like a top end defender? No, but he's filled in admirably. And I think that that's the main thing that you ask of him, right? As like a seventh D, he's been awesome. And I think that in the absence of Stanley and Heinola, he's done a great job. And so I'm not really inclined to waive him. Coughlin, I think, actually is pretty good, and I'm also not really inclined to waive him. But maybe the Jets can get one of these guys through without somebody claiming them. I do wonder if Coughlin maybe gets a little more of a look. I thought in camp and preseason he stood out positively, so that could be a bit of a challenge. But Heinola, I just feel like having not played in months, only going to start getting some reps with the Moose here in the next couple of weeks. It just feels like it's all sort of setting up for an early December return, which is kind of what I had to begin with him. I didn't think that he was going to be ready until the end of this month, early next month. I think having him back already skating in practice before, January is great. There was some concern when that infection first happened that pending the severity, he might be out for a lot longer. So I'm going to count this as a bit of a win. I think it's nice that he's almost ready to return. And I think that once he starts getting ice time, he's going to do some stuff that makes the Jets very happy. Will he have some moments that also frustrate them? Probably, but no more than Stanley at this point. I think, if you watch what Logan does, honestly, it can't be that much worse. Stanley has struggled with, the tight turns, the defensive mistakes in front of goal, and guys getting the inside edge work on him. I can't really imagine that, Heinola is going to be that much worse. I think you're basically going to get, at a minimum, a similar level of play. And if that's all that you get, fine, whatever. You can play either one of them, and I won't really care. But I feel pretty confident saying that Heinola is going to improve a couple of key aspects of Winnipeg's back-end puck movement. I am interested to know if he's going to also get some power play time. I don't imagine that to be the case because Winnipeg right now is really only running 1D per unit for the most part. You will sometimes see Pionk and Miller together, more so one or the other, but there have been instances where they've run 2D out there. I think for the Jets, it'd be nice if Heinola gets a look too, because on the power play, he's a very crisp and very fast passer. I don't think that he's going to, supplant Morrissey on the first unit. That's not happening. Morrissey is definitely a guy who I feel like has pretty much cemented his place in whatever spot he wants to be on this team. And if that's on the first power play unit, which is a yes, that's where he wants to be, he's not moving off of that. Whether he should be in that point role, we've talked about in the past. I think he's done a much better job this year of moving that puck faster. So as long as he keeps doing that, I think that's totally cool. And it's not like the coaching staff would make the change there. Second power play unit, there may be some wiggle room. I feel like Heinola is probably just not going to be used there all that often, unless it's just to give the unit a little bit of a different look from time to time. But otherwise, I think he's going to play probably 10 to 12 minutes a night. He's going to be used in that sheltered third pairing role at 5v5, and that's probably it. I do also sort of wonder about him on his offhand. In the past, Heinola has played on the right side. I don't know if he was particularly great at it, but, it is something to think about for the future as the Jets are trying to figure out their blue line stuff. But kind of on a related note, I do wonder a little bit about what the Jets are doing with Pionk. There's been a suggestion from Murat Atesh of The Athletic this past weekend that the Jets are keen to re-sign him. And I think that that also sort of impacts a lot of other downstream stuff, like what you do with some of these defenders. And if Winnipeg really does re-sign Pionk, it just takes off another spot that one of the kids might be able to occupy. And for me, I enjoy Pionk right now and what he's doing. I would not resign him long term. I appreciate the effort that he puts out on every shift, and this year offensively, he's been great. I also think that you see those parts of his game that are very clearly, not as refined as you'd like. Defensively, he still makes many of the same mistakes. And without Sandberg, I think you kind of realize that Pionk's game is extremely reliant on somebody who can basically be his complete safety valve. If he doesn't have that, then his ability to do this offensively aggressive stuff declines almost immediately. And so I just feel like I don't know that I love paying a lot of money for that. As much as I like Pionk, the dude, the player, especially at this age, getting to be 30 now, getting into the latter years of his career, I don't feel super comfortable with the idea of a long-term or even just a short-term big money extension. I think the Jets would be wise to maybe look at some of their kids internally to see if somebody might be ready to step up and take one of those spots. But, I don't make the decisions. I don't make those calls. The Jets are going to do what the Jets are going to do. And if he does come back, I just hope that he keeps doing what he's been doing alongside Sandberg. They've been a really good pairing. And I have to save my complaining and fights for what I think is the most important part. And probably Pionk is up there, but maybe not like the first priority. So, it is what it is, right? But for Heinola, I think he's got a really decent chance of playing some games in that third pairing spot, but I do wonder about that PK ability, if that's always going to limit the amount that the coaching staff trusts him. But we'll just have to see. He's not really close to returning. It's going to be a couple of weeks, at least is my guess. But hopefully the conditioning stint goes well. No issues, no dramas, no aggravation of the surgery site. That would be awesome. And then he can come up and start playing with the Jets. It's about dang time, right? He's really been cursed with some poor luck. So would be nice if something broke for the kid. But until then, Winnipeg still has a very busy schedule ahead. It's a brutal stretch of games. And all I'm hoping is that the Jets come out on the brighter side of things. But looking further ahead, the Jets are pretty firmly in a playoff spot, right? And they're unlikely to be unseated from the top three of the Central Division anytime soon, which means that you might be wondering, okay, if the Jets are in a good playoff position and have a good opportunity to come away with something big, what might make sense for them to go after in the coming months? Who might be available to help bolster this team? We'll chat about a couple of interesting names that I'm thinking about in just a little bit. But before we go too much further, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports available to everyone. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. If you're thinking about, a game ahead, say Winnipeg versus the Panthers, maybe you want to do 1.5 points over for Nick Ehlers. He's been really good. Josh Morrissey, also a pretty consistent source of offense. I'm going away from my top line predictions now because I feel like they've struggled recently, and they're having a bit of a scuffle. But I do think that they'll get back there at some point. Just maybe not in this game, right? But if you're wondering why PrizePicks should be the place that you make this bet, PrizePicks puts their members first so that all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. And when your picks hit, you can get your cash in as little as 15 minutes. They even offer Venmo for quick and easy deposits and withdrawals into your accounts. And the best news is that if somebody gets hurt in the middle of one of your matchups, no problem. Your lineup will still stay live. And of course, they invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out even if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks does not hit. There's even a special bonus for you right now because if you sign up today and get and play $5, you get $50 instantly. Again, you don't even need to win. You just get the $50 bonus when you play that $5. It's guaranteed. The only way to get in on the action, though, is to download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about, the Jets and how they've done so far, and kind of thinking a little bit further ahead, maybe a bit too far ahead for some, but in my mind, it's never too early to start talking about trades, right? I think the Jets are in a really good spot, and they could technically be better. Not that they really need to right now, but thinking ahead to the trade deadline, the Jets are going to be looking for some upgrades. And throughout the course of the season, there may be opportunities to make a really aggressive trade, get in on the action early, and maybe preempt some of what happens towards the deadline if perhaps a young player that happens to play the role of center becomes available. A lot of teams are already starting to find themselves on the margins of the playoffs. And with that in mind, it might not be the worst idea to try and get a jump on the market if a good trade, comes up. And one guy that I'm really thinking about is in Utah. It's Barrett Hayton. Hayton is an RFA who's been signed for 2 years, and he's got a rock bottom price tag of $2.65 million. I've always kind of been a little bit partial to Hayton. He's a really solid middle six center with a great shot, and offensively has done a pretty decent job for both Arizona and Utah. This year, the scoring rates aren't exactly crazy. 8 points in 18 games. But I would imagine that if he comes to the Jets, he might actually start to find some real offensive footing. In previous years, he had something like 43 points and 24 points the year prior. And so I feel like, maybe some of the uneven play hasn't been ideal, but if there's a guy who I feel like could use his size and skill to an advantage here for the Jets and could potentially turn into a real force on the ice for Winnipeg, Hayton might be an interesting gamble. I don't know that he'd be super expensive, but, you're looking at a guy who's on the younger side, who sort of fits our timeline of the next 2 years or so, and could potentially provide excess value. Another guy that maybe the Jets might have an interest in is Morgan Frost. Frost is kind of on the periphery of the Flyers right now. There have been talks about him being dealt. He's a guy that I'd kind of want to, watch a little more closely to see what his fit's like. It's very clear that offensively he is super talented. He's got a great shot. He's a menace in the slot. I just don't know if his style of game is going to necessarily mesh with what the Jets want to do. Winnipeg is a very ground and pound kind of team, and I don't know that Frost is necessarily the sort that's going to attack the slot in that sort of way. I think he'll get into the greasy areas, and he's gotten some tips and stuff, but in terms of being like a Lowry type, if the Jets are after that, that's not really his game, right? He's more of a finesse player. Another center that a lot of people aren't really that interested in, and I don't disagree with it, but I do still kind of have some level of interest in, is Trevor Zegras. And I know that Zegras has, he gets into TikTok shenanigans, and I think a lot of people just dislike his personality. He's very flashy. Sometimes I think people have the idea that he's a bit vain or whatever, and I've heard all sorts of things about his character, which I don't know how much of it's true, how much of it isn't. But, with the kind of talent that he has and the skill, I feel like if you just look at it from a purely hockey perspective, Zegras feels like a really safe bet to bounce back. The problem is that his cap hit is not cheap. And, given that he plays a pretty premium position, he's 23, and Anaheim is in a state where they're trying to build the future, maybe Zegras wouldn't be that cheap. I think that there's a lot of talent. This guy was like a 60-point player not that long ago. And I think for the Jets, he could kind of become a sort of Kyle Connor 2.0, if you will. Maybe what you wanted Chaz Lucius to be before Lucius's career kind of got derailed by injury. I'm not saying that that's really, the likely scenario, but I could see it happening. Again, though, with the amount that it's going to cost you and some of the questions on the off-ice stuff, I would say that it's more of a fringe option for me. I would like to kind of see what he does the rest of the season before making that hard decision. But I think right now the Jets probably would skip that. Last guy that I think might be of interest, and it really depends on what happens with the Islanders, is Brock Nelson. Nelson's a really big center. Obviously, towards the end of his career, but he's still really productive, right? The hand-eye coordination is still there. He's great on the power play in front of the net. He's still got excellent puck deflection ability, a really powerful shot. He's not afraid to mix it up in the corners. He's not like the fastest skater, mind you, and maybe that's something that's going to kind of hold him back a little bit. But for what the Jets like to do and what I could see Winnipeg going for, especially if he's, used on the second power play unit, I think that there could be some real value in talking to the Islanders towards, the trade deadline. I think he'll probably be one of the hotter commodities, but that's assuming that the Islanders are just really not in a playoff spot. If Lou thinks that they have even a remote chance, he's probably not going to be on the market then. So Winnipeg, I really think is going to be after a center this time. Nemesnikov, I think, has done about as good of a job as you can ask him to, but I think it is kind of noticeable that he is, starting to slow down a little bit. He's 31. I think some of his ability to get separation has been a little bit questionable. It does feel like maybe he's also dealing with some kind of an injury. I feel like his skating has not really been the usual standard, and some of the offense occasionally dies on his stick a little bit. More so when he has to be the one to create rather than the one who's finishing off opportunities. It's why it probably wouldn't be the worst idea to use him more as a winger, but, failing that right now, he's still going to be the 2C, and so the Jets are just going to have to live with that until they figure out something that might be a little bit more sustainable for the playoffs. But I'd be curious to know what names out there you're interested in. Who are you thinking for your second-line center? Is there another position that you're interested in? I would probably have some interest in a defender of some sort, but I don't even know what that market is going to look like for the time being. So we'll just have to be a little bit more patient, especially if there's a right-handed defender who might be a boost for the Jets. But drop your interests below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's show, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. Tomorrow we'll have coverage of Winnipeg versus Florida, so let's hope for a big win and hope that they didn't make my predictions look very silly. But like I said, thanks for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.